Welcome to Forbes Books at Bedtime with Kate Delaney and Greg Stebbin.
Very excited to welcome to the show Dr. Yoram Solomon. He is a guy who, boy, we could probably do 10 hours with him, Greg, but we have limited time.
I didn't bring my lunch.
I know you needed to. I mean, listen, I'm not kidding you. He just did a TEDx talk that was awesome. He's got 21 patents in the U.S. and worldwide. He's written 8 books. And I'll tell you what, he wrote one of my favorite books that talks about unkilling creativity, or it's Unkill Creativity, Cultures Start With You, Not Your Boss. And he's done so many more, like I said, that we could talk to him forever, including Blueprints for the Next Big Thing. I like that too as well. So I have my favorites.
I personally have a preference, Yoram, for the book Bowling with a Crystal Ball.
That was my first one.
I love that. So you have this propensity, you're very verbose and you want to get it all out there. And it's funny because people struggle with the whole idea of writing a book, but you've written them, put them together, etc. I mean, I said it, you published 8 books. So let's start there. What started you down that path with the book that Greg just mentioned?
Well, actually, first of all, my problem is the opposite. My problem is I need to stop writing books and do other things. But
you should never say that to a set of podcast hosts who work for Forbes Books. We don't think there could ever be enough books.
Yeah. What happened was back in 2007. Well, actually, this just started in 2005 when I took on the role of a strategy director for a business unit in Texas Instruments, actually a business group. And the result of my work, I tried to understand what would be the future of connectivity, specifically wired connectivity. And as I did my research in forecasting technological trends that because they're so aggressive, we tend to think that they're so unpredictable. What I found was that they are not only aggressive, but highly predictable. So I started investigating and interviewing people who lead technologies in the world, not just in the U.S., to find why, actually the psychological reasons to why those technological trends are so predictable. The result of that was the creation of USB 3. The current generation of USB really started with that work. There are different sides to the story. Some of the sides actually come clear more in the culture starts with you, not your boss, more on the organizational side. But the technological side came together back in 2005. And as a result, I decided to put it down in writing and describe how did I get there? How did I get to USB 3? And not just USB 3, but kind of provide the tools that would allow anybody, any technologist or a marketing person, specifically in high tech, know where the future of technology is. And so I wrote this book, and of course this book had a chapter 18 that was called Putting It All Together, the Story of USB 3. The only problem was that Intel had not announced USB 3 at that time. And I was not going to announce USB 3 for them through my book. And so I published the book in 2007. It came without chapter 18, Putting It All Together, the Story of USB 3. And sure enough, 2 months later, Intel announced USB 3. And what I decided to do is, because that book actually had, 18 different trends, technological trends that I forecasted 7 years out. In 2014, I revisited and found that I was accurate within 3% in forecasting some of the most aggressive technology trends. And then I decided to release the second edition of that same book, this time with Here Is What the Reality Was, and Chapter 18, Putting It All Together, the Story of USB 3.
We're talking with Dr. Yoram Solomon. He's an innovator, as you've heard, a speaker, an author, as you've heard, an educator. You can find him at yoramsolomon.com, YORAMSOLOMON.com. And I want to ask you about one of your other books, which is Unkill Creativity, How Corporate America Can Out-Innovate Startups. Where did you get the title Unkill Creativity? Because it's compelling, but it's also a little scary.
Well, it actually came from an article that came from Teresa Amabile. Teresa Amabile is a professor she initially was professor for psychology, but then moved to the business school in Harvard. And she wrote an article, and I'm trying to remember, I think the year was 98. And the title of that article was How to Kill Creativity. And she gave her model of the factors that affect creativity in the workplace. She wrote books since then, and she was my hero in that area of what affects creativity in organizations. I used a lot of her work in my PhD dissertation that was on the same topic. Why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in mature companies? And I thought that I was ready to not only explain why those differences are, but what can large companies do to be as creative as startups, because I truly believe that every company has the potential of being the most innovative company in the world, and it's really just a matter of culture. So when I put together all those rules and all those processes and things that companies need to do, I thought that the best title would be to kind of close this cycle, close this circle with Teresa Amabile's article, How to Kill Creativity, and write a book on how to unkill creativity.
So it's fascinating. So explain that to us. If you were just going to give us the and you gave us the reason for it, but how do you do that? How do you the culture starting with you? So how do you really make that work?
Well, it starts with how do you think that you become an innovative company? We tend to focus on the tools. So there's design thinking and trees and all kinds of tools, lean startup. All these tools are great, but I like to compare them to my military background. If I put a high-performance sniper rifle in your hand and give you the best ammunition, match-grade ammunition, you're still not going to be able to take a 1,000-yard shot. You really need to have the right attitude, the right culture. So having those tools is not enough. You need to also have the right culture. Now, how do you build that right culture? First of all, we like to think of culture when we talk about organizational culture. Oh, this is something that my boss is responsible for. If you read the story of USB 3 as told in Unkill Creativity and also in Culture Starts With You, when you read that story, you realize that culture does not have to start with your boss. You can't look at your boss and say, well, it's your fault. You're the one that's not creating the right culture. You have a role in it, and you can actually turn this around as well. So every employee in the company has the responsibility of creating a culture of innovation. But then it comes to one element, and that one element that allows you to build a culture of innovation or kills any possibility of having that kind of culture is what I call, and trademarked, TrustActions. It's really trust, and it's the transactions that build trust in an organization.
It's interesting, Yoram, as you were talking about culture and your book, Culture Starts With You, Not Your Boss, I realized that I met somebody recently, and I can't even remember who it was. So the person didn't stick with me, but her story did. She went to work for a company that had a very sort of repressive culture, and she's not a repressive person at all. And she turned it into a total party culture. How did she do it? By just showing up for work every day and being a party person. Now, she never did anything that was inappropriate for the workplace. In fact, everything she did made the workplace an even more efficient, creative place. But she was not the boss. She was just someone in a cube. But she transformed the culture in exactly the way you're saying, by literally just being a culture that overpowered the repressiveness. And the repressiveness, frankly, was not very good for the company.
Exactly. And that's exactly the message that comes from Culture Starts With You, Not Your Boss. the story of USB 3, the first part of it was the technology forecasting, but the second part of it is going to my boss, a senior VP in the company, and presenting a business plan for USB 3 and getting rejected. So he did not want to do that. He said, first, bring a customer. And of course, I didn't have a customer at that time. I just knew that this is bound to happen. We have to have USB 3. So, I went home that day and I decided that I'm going to resign. I'm going to write my resignation letter. The thing is, I have this rule about never writing a resignation letter in the evening. Always write it in the morning when you're fresh and creative and can use long words. And so I got up in the morning and decided to write my resignation letter, except I decided that, or was planning to write the resignation letter, except that morning I woke up and decided that instead of writing the resignation letter, I'm going to do USB 3. And so it's doing it without the boss's permission and taking ownership and accountability for it. And eventually, right now we have 4 billion USB 3 ports shipped every year, and it was because I wouldn't take no for an answer. So that's part of how you create a culture.
Wow, this is so fascinating that if you have the time, we would love to carry you over and talk to you yet again some more, Dr. Solomon.
I would love that.
Excellent. So we're going to be back with more with Dr. Solomon. You'll be able to catch that in our next show. Thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you.
Welcome to Forbes Books at Bedtime with Kate Delaney and Greg Stebbin.
As Greg predicted, we needed to pack our lunch or at least a snack because we've got Dr. Yoram Solomon back with us again. See, Greg, you predicted that.
Yeah, I got to grab a snack here. So, but Dr.
Because he's
Solomon,
too fascinating. Yes, he's too fascinating.
He's an innovator, speaker, author, educator, author of 8 books, 21 or 22 patents, one of the guys behind USB 3. And we haven't even talked about what USB 3 is and why it's so significant for us as consumers and technology users. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Yoram, is this idea of culture starts with you, not your boss. I would imagine people listening to that and thinking, oh, sure, it sounds good, but how do I start? Sometimes the hardest part for people is taking that first step forward. And if I'm not generally someone who thinks of myself as a culture maker, what do I do inside me so that I can bring that kind of change to the rest of my company if I'm not the boss?
That's a perfect question. And it goes back to the Newton's third law of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so whatever you do, there's going to be a reaction to it. And the question is, what kind of reaction do you want? One of the reasons I use this trademark TrustActions is because there is a vicious cycle between trust and actions that take place. So if I trust someone, the actions that they're going to take will reflect the trust that I have in them, and those actions would further allow me to trust them more. And the flip side is true as well. If I distrust someone, then what you get is actions that represent that distrust and only support why I distrust them. So, there are people who start with, I trust no one, and you have to earn my trust. well, it's going to be very hard to build that trust. And remember that if you build that trust, you need to have that trust in order to build a culture of innovation and then use the innovation tool and then be an innovative company. Well, there are other people on the other side that believe in, I trust you 100%. I trust you with my life, even though I never met you before. I trust you with my life, and this trust is yours to lose. Well, I'm not a big advocate of that. However, each one of us has this level of, this is where I feel comfortable trusting someone I don't know yet. All I'm suggesting is just push it a little higher. You know where you feel comfortable, trust them a little more. I think it was Ernest Hemingway who said, the way to know if you can trust someone is to trust them. And so try to trust them, see what actions you get in response, because those actions would most likely support the fact that you trusted them, and that cycle will build from there. This is true in two dimensions. It's true in the horizontal dimension, in teamwork between you and your peers, people at the same organizational level. And it's also true in the vertical axis between you as a leader and your followers, and between you as a follower and your leader.
Wow. Thinking of that, it's interesting. And again, going back to the culture, one of the things that Greg mentioned, and you said it, Yoram, you just did it, USB 3, talk about the significance, because I want to make sure we get to that. Talk about the significance of that and why, as consumers who maybe, I don't know how they wouldn't know it, but if they don't know what we're talking about, talk about what it was like to create that and how significant it is.
Okay, so first of all, the significance of it is USB ports used to be black, and now they're blue. So that's very important.
Well, if we were in the fashion industry, that really would be important.
So there. I mean, PCs are becoming more and more fashionable. So having blue ports, it really adds a lot. It really pops out the color from the USB port. But to be more serious, and I'll go back to when I started this in 2005, the amount of content that you had was not very big. There was no high-definition TV or no high-definition TV files. Your connectivity to the internet was not very fast. And so there was a limited amount of content that you carried. Remember that in 2005, an average hard disk drive in a computer would be just about 160 gigabytes, which is, you laugh at it today because nobody gets a computer that has less than 1 terabyte inside, even a laptop, a small laptop. So the content is becoming richer and richer. Just yesterday, I gave a workshop for the Dallas Business Journal, and I recorded it on my camera. Now, this is a high-definition camera, not yet 4K, definitely not 8K. That file was 48 gigabytes. It was a 2-hour workshop. So now think about this. That file is on your SD card. You plug it into your computer. It does go through a USB port. How long do you want that file to get into, or how long do you want it to take for that file to get into your computer?
Well, I think I have two choices, right? It can be 3 minutes or 3 days. That's
right. So you can do it with USB 2 that runs at 480 megabits per second, theoretical, because practical it's about 60-70% of that. And then you can use USB 3, and then there's the second generation 3.1 that runs 20 times faster. So the whole idea behind USB 3 was to, back then in 2005, realize that it's going to take 5 years for something like this to hit the market, maybe even more than 5 years. And so you need to know where technology is going to be in 5 years to identify where the bottlenecks are. And to me, the bottleneck was USB 3. So, but that's only part of it. This is the value of why USB is important to your readers or listeners. But the second part is, so how do you get it, especially after your boss says no? Well, I went to the 3 engineers that I knew could make it work. And I told them, look, I need you to work on USB 3. And they said, you don't have to convince us. Just tell our boss. If our boss tells us to do it, we'll do it. And I said, well, here's the problem. I already told him. So they get happy. And I said, but you said no. I said, so here's the thing. This is important. We're going to be leaders with this. However, and you're the only three people that can make that demo that we can go and show Intel and show that this works, that we can run 5 gigabit per second over a 14-foot USB cable. However, because our boss said no, one, you can't do that at the expense of your day job. Two, you can't tell anyone because you'll get in trouble. And three, if you get in trouble, I can't help you because you don't work for me.
Sounds like a great plan, Yoram.
It does.
Yes, I know. It's like you go out with this. So here are the reasons why you shouldn't do that. What I don't know if maybe unconsciously I did realize that this to the engineers was value proposition. They wanted to get in trouble. They wanted to work on this dark project, something that you can't even tell your boss. And as a result, they all signed in and they worked on it. A month later, or less than a month later, we flew over to Hillsboro, Oregon to meet with Intel, demonstrate to them that we can run 5 gigabit per second over a 14-foot USB cable. And as they say, the rest is history.
So is this a good example, Yoram, of, and we're talking with Dr. Yoram Solomon. He's an innovator, clearly, speaker, author, 8 books, educator. His website is yoramsolomon.com, YORAMSOLOMON.com. Is this an example of what you talk about in the book, Unkill Creativity, how corporate America can out-innovate startups? Is what you did a great example of how you could bring to life something that otherwise would have died in a company with a very large and probably slow culture?
Exactly. And it is. That example is in that book, and it's also in the book, Culture Starts With You, Not Your Boss. It is, I remember once when I worked in Texas Instruments, I flew over to Israel, and I met with an Israeli engineer, and he came to me and he said, I have so many great ideas. And, he told me some of them, they are great ideas. I have so many great ideas, but my problem is that management kills them off. They shoot them down. And I said, so what do you do about it? And he said, well, what can I do? I mean, when management shoots your ideas down, what can you do? And I said, so you probably don't have very good ideas. And so he looked at me puzzled, and what do you mean I don't have good ideas? Those are good ideas. I said, well, if you don't believe in your ideas enough to not even hear the word no, then maybe they're not good enough. And you have to be the first person that believes in your idea. As Simon Sinek said, start with why. If you have your why, you know why you want to do this, you know why this is important, you know why it's more important than keeping your job, then it's not a good enough idea. But if you know this why, just go for it. It's more important than your job. And the thing is that once you act this way, all of a sudden management will come around and say, well, we have this crazy person that really believes in this idea and pushes and pushes and pushes, and we're starting to see the potential of this. Then they're going to come around. This goes back into TrustActions, TrustActions. It's a cycle.
I love that. Perfect place to end this. Dr. Yoram Solomon, fantastic. Read more about his background. Like we said, we didn't even touch on that. We could talk to him all day. Go to yoramsolomon.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.